"You don't belong in this seat." Those 6 words, spoken with a sneer by a veteran airline captain to a quiet woman in seat 1A, would end up costing him everything. He saw a worn-out hoodie, messy hair, and dark skin. He didn't see the woman who had the power to ground his entire fleet. When Captain Brad Holloway decided to humiliate Dr. Naomi Sterling in front of a packed first-class cabin, he thought he was just cleaning up the passenger list. He had no idea that by the time the landing gear touched down in London, his career would be in ashes, and a dark, buried secret from his past would be exposed for the world to see. This is the story of the flight that changed everything. The rain at JFK International Airport was relentless, hammering against the floor-to-ceiling glass of Terminal 4 like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and the palpable tension of delayed travelers. Dr. Naomi Sterling sat in the corner of the exclusive Horizon Air First Class lounge, trying to make herself as small as possible. She pulled the hood of her charcoal grey sweatshirt further over her head. She wasn't trying to hide from the authorities. She was hiding from the world. It had been 48 hours since the funeral in Chicago. Her father, the only family she had left, was gone. Naomi was exhausted. Her eyes were red-rimmed behind her dark sunglasses, and her body ached with a fatigue that went deeper than muscle and bone. She didn't look like a VIP. She didn't look like money. She looked like a shadow. She clutched her boarding pass for flight HA882 to London Heathrow, seat 1A. It was a seat usually reserved for diplomats, A-list celebrities, or tech moguls. Today, it belonged to a grieving daughter just trying to get home to her apartment in Kensington. "Final boarding call for flight HA882, the announcer's voice chimed, smooth and professional. Naomi stood up, shouldering her battered leather backpack. It was a vintage piece, worth more than most people's cars, but to the untrained eye, it just looked old. She kept her head down as she walked toward the jet bridge, bypassing the long line of economy passengers and slipping into the priority lane. That was where she met him. Captain Brad Holloway stood at the entrance of the jet bridge, chatting with the gate agent. He was the picture of aviation authority. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, a jawline that could cut glass, and a uniform so crisp it looked like it had never seen a wrinkle. He was a senior pilot with 30 years in the sky, the kind of man who commanded a room just by walking into it. He was also, as Naomi was about to find out, a man who believed heavily in appearances. As Naomi approached the scanner, Holloway's laughter cut off. His blue eyes narrowed, scanning her from her scuffed sneakers to her oversized hoodie. He stepped slightly into her path, blocking the entrance to the bridge. "Excuse me, miss," Holloway said. His voice was a deep baritone, polite on the surface but laced with ice. "The economy boarding line is to the left. You're in the priority lane." Naomi paused, looking up. She didn't have the energy for this. She just wanted to sleep. She silently held out her boarding pass. Holloway didn't take it. He looked at the paper in her hand, then back at her face. He smirked, a small, condescending twist of his lips. "I think there's been a mistake. Seat 1A? That's a corporate hold, usually for our established clientele." The gate agent, a younger woman named Sarah with a kind face, looked nervous. "Captain, if she has the pass, check it again, Sarah," Holloway commanded, not taking his eyes off Naomi. "System glitches happen. We don't want the young lady getting comfortable in a seat she can't afford, only to have to do the walk of shame back to row 45 later. I'm saving her the embarrassment." Naomi felt the heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't the first time she'd been judged for her appearance or her race. But today, with her grief so raw, it felt like a physical slap. "It's not a mistake," Naomi said, her voice raspy from days of crying. "Please, just let me board." Holloway chuckled, shaking his head as if dealing with a petulant child. He leaned in closer, invading her personal space. "Look, sweetheart, I don't know who you charmed to get that ticket, or if you're some employee riding on a buddy pass. But let me be clear. On my ship, we maintain a standard. You look like you just rolled out of a dive bar." He plucked the boarding pass from her hand, his fingers brushing hers with deliberate disrespect. He handed it to Sarah. "Scan it. If it beeps red, she stays here." Sarah took the pass, her hands trembling slightly. She scanned it. Beep! A crisp green light flashed. Holloway's eyebrows shot up. He looked genuinely annoyed, as if the machine had insulted him personally. "It's valid, Captain," Sarah said quietly, handing it back to Naomi. "Dr. Sterling is cleared for 1A. Dr. Sterling. Holloway bristled at the title. He looked Naomi up and down one last time, his gaze lingering on her frayed hoodie with disgust. He didn't apologize. He didn't step aside gracefully. Instead, he leaned in and whispered, low enough that only she could hear. "Doctor, huh? Internet degree. Enjoy the champagne, darling. Just try not to steal the silverware." He turned on his heel and marched down the jet bridge, leaving Naomi standing there, her heart pounding against her ribs. She took a deep breath, swallowing the lump in her throat, and walked onto the plane. She didn't know it yet, but Captain Holloway had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The cabin of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner was a sanctuary of beige leather and soft, ambient lighting. Naomi found Seat 1A, a private suite that offered total seclusion. She tossed her backpack into the overhead bin and collapsed into the seat, immediately pulling a blanket over her head. She didn't want a pre-departure drink. She didn't want a hot towel. She just wanted to disappear. But Captain Holloway wasn't done. 20 minutes later, boarding was complete. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged. Naomi had her eyes closed, listening to the hum of the engines when she felt a presence looming over her. She pulled the blanket down. Holloway was standing there again. He wasn't in the cockpit where he belonged. He was doing a final greet of the first-class cabin, a performative ritual he loved because it allowed passengers to fawn over him. He was charming a couple in 2A and 2B, laughing loudly about a golf trip in Scotland. As he turned and saw Naomi, his smile vanished instantly, replaced by that same look of cold disdain. "Everything comfortable here?" he asked, though the tone suggested he hoped it wasn't. "I'm fine," Naomi said, turning her head toward the window. "Good," Holloway said. Then, loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear, he added, "We usually require passengers to store their carry-on items properly. That sack you threw up there is blocking the latch. My flight attendants aren't maids, miss. You might want to fix it before we taxi." The cabin went silent. The couple in row 2 stopped smiling. A businessman in 1F lowered his newspaper. It was an unnecessary, blatant aggression. The bag was fine. The bin was closed. A flight attendant, a sharp woman named Beatrice, who had been with the airline for 20 years, stepped forward immediately. She had seen the interaction, and her face was tight with disapproval. "I checked the bins myself, Captain," Beatrice said firmly. "Ms. Sterling's luggage is secure. We are ready for pushback." Holloway glared at Beatrice. The hierarchy in aviation was strict, but Holloway abused it. He didn't like being corrected by the help. "Just making sure, Beatrice," Holloway snapped. "We have a certain image to uphold. I don't want the cabin looking like a locker room." He cast one last sneer at Naomi. "Fly safe." He disappeared into the cockpit, slamming the heavy door behind him. Naomi was shaking. She wasn't angry anymore. She was humiliated. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her. Some pitying, some curious, some judging. She pulled her knees up to her chest, feeling like an intruder in a space she had paid $10,000 to be in. The plane taxied and took off, piercing the grey clouds and bursting into the sunlight above. As the seatbelt sign turned off, Beatrice appeared at Naomi's side with a bottle of water and a warm look. "I am so sorry about that," Beatrice whispered, crouching down so they were eye level. "Captain Holloway is old school. He can be difficult. Please don't let him ruin your flight." Naomi took the water, her hands steadying. She looked at Beatrice. "Does he do that often?" Beatrice hesitated. It was dangerous to speak ill of a captain. Retaliation in the airline industry could be subtle and career-ending, but she saw something in Naomi's eyes, a depth of sadness that broke her heart. "He has his favorites," Beatrice said carefully. "And he has his targets. He doesn't like anything that disrupts his view of how the world should look. But," she lowered her voice further, "between you and me, he's been worse lately. Reckless, arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable because he's close with the chief of operations, Marcus Thorne." Naomi froze. The name Marcus Thorne hit her like a physical blow. "Marcus Thorne," Naomi repeated slowly. "You mean the VP of Operations for Horizon?" "The very same," Beatrice nodded, rolling her eyes. "They play golf every weekend. It's the boys' club. That's why Holloway gets away with murder. He treats the junior pilots like dirt, talks down to passengers he deems unworthy, and we just have to smile and pour the coffee." Naomi sat back, a strange coldness settling over her. The grief was still there, but something else was beginning to stir beneath it. A sharp, focused anger. "I see," Naomi said softly. "So he feels protected." "Invincible is more like it," Beatrice sighed. "Anyway, can I get you anything else? Champagne? A hot meal?" "No thank you, Beatrice," Naomi said. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a sleek black tablet. "Actually, there is one thing. Does this plane have the new satellite Wi-Fi installed? The high-speed encrypted network?" "Yes. We were the first fleet to get it last month," Beatrice said. "Do you need the login?" "No," Naomi said, powering up the device. Her fingers flew across the screen, bypassing the standard guest login and bringing up a terminal command prompt. "I have my own access." Beatrice looked confused, but she stood up. "All right. Let me know if you need anything." As Beatrice walked away, Naomi stared at the cockpit door. Holloway thought she was a nobody. He thought she was a hoodlum who had lucked into a ticket. He thought his friendship with Marcus Thorne made him a god in the sky. Naomi opened a secure messaging app on her tablet. The ID verified her biometrics, retina scan and fingerprint. A profile loaded on the screen. It wasn't social media. It was the internal corporate directory for Pegasus Holdings, the parent company that had quietly acquired Horizon Air 3 months ago in a sealed deal that hadn't hit the public news yet. Naomi wasn't just a doctor. She was Dr. Naomi Sterling, PhD in aerospace engineering, former NTSB lead investigator, and as of 90 days ago, the majority shareholder and CEO of Pegasus Holdings. She effectively owned the plane she was sitting in. She looked at the name Marcus Thorne on the directory. Status: active. She looked at Brad Holloway. Status: active. Senior captain. She began to type. She didn't text a friend. She didn't tweet a complaint. She messaged the Director of Human Resources and the Chief of Security for the global network. Message: pull the personnel file for Captain Brad Holloway, Horizon Air, full audit, flight logs, HR complaints, and fuel consumption reports for the last 6 months. Also, Get me the audio feed from the cockpit voice recorder of flight HA-882. Live stream it to my device. Now." She hit send. Up in the cockpit, Brad Halloway was laughing, his feet propped up near the rudder pedals, completely unaware that the hoodie girl in 1A had just turned his aircraft into a courtroom, and his trial had already begun. But the turbulence was just starting. As Naomi dug into the digital files streaming to her tablet, she found something she didn't expect. It wasn't just an attitude problem. There was a discrepancy in the fuel logs from Halloway's flights. Massive amounts of fuel were being offloaded in remote cargo hubs in North Africa during layovers. Naomi's eyes widened. He wasn't just a jerk, he was smuggling. The dramatic irony of the moment hung in the air like smoke. Halloway had insulted the one woman in the world with the clearance to see his crimes, and she was sitting 30 feet behind him, watching his life unravel in real time. "You wanted to check my bag, Captain?" Naomi whispered to herself, her finger hovering over a file marked Cairo, Manifest Error. "Let's check yours." The cabin of flight HA-882 had settled into the hushed, suspended animation of a transatlantic crossing. The window shades were drawn, casting the first-class cabin in a twilight blue gloom. Most passengers were asleep, lulled by the rhythmic thrum of the Rolls-Royce Trent 1000 engines. But inside seat 1A, the atmosphere was electric. Dr. Naomi Sterling sat motionless, her noise-cancelling headphones over her ears. To a passerby, she looked like she was listening to a meditation playlist or perhaps a podcast. In reality, she was eavesdropping on a private conversation taking place 30 feet away. Behind the reinforced, bulletproof door of the cockpit, the live audio feed, streamed via the airline's secure satellite uplink to her tablet, was crystal clear. It was a fail-safe system she had designed herself 3 years ago for the NTSB, a silent black box that allowed ground control to monitor cockpit audio in real time during emergencies. Captain Halloway had no idea it was active. He thought the voice recorder only looped on a 2-hour cycle, accessible only after a crash. Naomi listened, her eyes fixed on the rolling lines of code on her screen. "Tell you, kid, you worry too much," Halloway's voice crackled in her ears. It was relaxed, arrogant. "Nobody looks at the discrepancy logs for the Cairo runs. Thorne wipes them before they even hit the main server in Chicago." A younger voice responded. It was the first officer, whom the system identified as David Chen. He sounded tight, anxious. "I don't know, Brad. The variance on the last trip was 3,000 pounds of fuel. That's not a rounding error. If the auditors see we offloaded that much Jet A without a flight plan change—" "Auditors?" Halloway scoffed. Naomi could hear the clink of a coffee cup being set down. "Who do you think hires the auditors, David?" "Marcus Thorne." "The fuel isn't missing, it's just reallocated. We land heavy. We pump the excess into the tankers waiting on the tarmac in Lagos or Cairo, and we take the cash envelope. It's a surcharge for our expertise." Naomi felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cabin's air conditioning. This wasn't just smuggling. This was grand larceny and a massive safety violation. They were carrying excess fuel, making the plane heavier, burning more gas to carry that weight, just to sell the surplus on the black market in regions where aviation fuel prices were sky high. They were using her airplanes as flying tankers. "I don't like it," David Chen said, his voice barely a whisper. "I just want to fly the plane, Brad. I have a wife. If the FAA finds out—" "The FAA isn't in the cockpit, are they?" Halloway's voice dropped, losing its casual edge. It became menacing. "I am. And I write your performance reviews, David. You want to make captain before you're 50? You want those prime routes to Tokyo and Paris? Then you shut your mouth, flip the switches I tell you to flip, and take your cut. Don't grow a conscience now. You're already in." Silence followed. A heavy, oppressive silence. Naomi's fingers hovered over her tablet. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. This man, this Captain Halloway, who had sneered at her hoodie and mocked her poverty, was essentially a criminal mastermind operating a fuel theft ring from the sky. And he was doing it with the protection of Marcus Thorne, the VP of Operations. She minimized the audio window and opened the flight telemetry data. She wanted to see the numbers herself. She pulled up the logs for Halloway's flight history over the last 6 months. It was a pattern of subtle devastation. Flight HA404 to Cairo. Departed with 15% excess fuel reserves. Arrived with minimum statutory reserves. Flight HA901 to Lagos. Departed with max weight. Unaccounted stopover time on the tarmac, 45 minutes. He was stealing millions of dollars from the company her father had spent 40 years building. Her father, who had started as a mechanic with grease under his fingernails, who treated every penny of the airline's money as a sacred trust. Naomi looked down at her own attire, the grey hoodie. Her father had worn a grey hoodie just like this when he worked in the hangar on weekends. Halloway saw it as a sign of failure. Naomi knew it was a uniform of hard work. She felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. This wasn't the time for grief. This was the time for a surgeon's precision. She opened a new command window. She needed to verify one last thing. If Halloway was offloading fuel, he had to be fudging the fuel on board, FOB sensors manually. Modern planes calculated fuel automatically, but a senior pilot with override codes could mask the real numbers to trick the flight computer into thinking the burn rate was higher than it was. She queried the flight management computer, FMC, directly from her seat. It was a risky move. If Halloway was watching the system's display closely, he might see a remote access ping. She held her breath and hit enter. The data flooded back. Sensor 4 override. Active. User ID B. Halloway. "Got you," she whispered. She had the smoking gun. Halloway was manually manipulating the sensors to hide the theft. Suddenly, the audio feed crackled again. "I'm going back," Halloway announced to the co-pilot. "I need to stretch my legs. Keep her steady, David, and don't touch the comms." "Yes, Captain," David replied, sounding defeated. Naomi froze. Halloway was coming back into the cabin. She quickly swiped the screen, hiding the telemetry data and bringing up a generic e-reader app showing a dense PDF of an engineering manual. She pulled her blanket up to her chin, turned her face slightly toward the window, and waited. She needed him to think she was nothing, just a scared girl in a big seat. The element of surprise was the only weapon she had left. The heavy door of the cockpit unlatched with a mechanical thud. Captain Brad Halloway emerged, adjusting his tie. He paused in the galley to speak with Beatrice, the flight attendant. Naomi couldn't hear their words, but she saw Halloway's body language. He leaned against the bulkhead, relaxed and commanding, grabbing a bottle of water from her cart without asking. He looked like a man without a care in the world. A man who owned the sky. He scanned the cabin. His eyes glossed over the sleeping businessman in rows 2 and 3. Then, inevitably, they landed on seat 1A. Naomi felt his gaze. It was heavy, like a physical weight. She didn't move. She kept her eyes glued to the tablet, pretending to read a paragraph about aerodynamic drag coefficients. Halloway began to walk down the aisle. He didn't head for the lavatory. He headed straight for her. The carpet dampened the sound of his footsteps, but the scent of his cologne, a sharp, expensive musk, announced his arrival before he even stopped. He loomed over her seat, blocking the dim light from the cabin ceiling. "Still awake?" he asked. The tone wasn't friendly. It was probing. Naomi looked up slowly, sliding her headphones off one ear. She kept her expression neutral, masking the pounding of her heart. "Just doing some reading, Captain. I can't sleep on planes." Holloway smirked. He looked at the tablet in her lap. "Reading? Looks like a lot of numbers for light reading. What is that? Homework?" He was fishing. He wanted to know why a girl in a hoodie was staring at technical documents. "Something like that," Naomi said softly. "I'm an engineer. I like to understand how things work." "An engineer," Holloway repeated, the skepticism dripping from his voice. He leaned down, placing one hand on the shell of her seat, boxing her in. It was an intimidation tactic, pure and simple. "You know, there's a big difference between reading a manual and actually flying a machine like this. You book learners always think you know the sky. But up here, the books don't matter. Only experience matters." Naomi held his gaze. Her father had taught her that the loudest man in the room was usually the most insecure. "Experience is valuable," Naomi agreed, her voice steady. "But so is integrity. The math doesn't lie, Captain. People do. Numbers don't." Holloway's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. His eyes narrowed. Did he sense the double meaning, or did he just think she was being rude? "You have a sharp tongue for someone flying on a charity ticket," he muttered, leaning closer. "Let me give you a piece of advice, Doctor. Don't try to be the smartest person in the room, especially when you're a guest in my house. You sit here, you drink your free soda, and you be grateful. Because if I wanted to, I could have the authorities waiting for you in London to check your credentials. We take security very seriously." It was a threat. He was threatening to frame her, or at least harass her with security, just because he didn't like her face. Naomi felt a cold rage settle in her stomach. It was a clarifying anger. He was threatening the wrong woman. "I appreciate the concern for security, Captain," Naomi said, locking eyes with him. She decided to test the waters, to see how much he would lie. "Actually, since you're here, I noticed something on the in-flight map. It feels like we're dragging a bit. The fuel consumption seems high for a 780-710 at this altitude. Are we fighting a headwind?" It was a specific, technical question, a question a casual passenger wouldn't ask. Holloway stiffened. He pulled back slightly, his hand leaving her seat. He looked at her with a new expression. Suspicion. "The map is just for entertainment," he said dismissively, though his voice had lost its smooth charm. "It's not accurate telemetry. We're burning standard rates. Why, you worried we're going to run out?" He gave a cruel, short laugh. "Don't worry. I always carry extra." "Extra," Naomi repeated. "That's good to know." "Just stick to your video games, sweetheart," Holloway snapped. He straightened up, brushing invisible dust off his uniform. "Leave the flying to the professionals." He turned and walked away, heading toward the lavatory. But Naomi noticed something. His walk was faster now, less swagger, more tension. Her question had spooked him. He knew that she knew something about fuel, even if he thought she was just a nosy student. Naomi watched the lavatory door close behind him. She immediately brought her messaging app back up. She had the evidence of the theft. She had the audio of the coercion. Now she needed the cleanup crew. She typed a message to the head of global security for Pegasus Holdings, a man named Colonel James Sterling, no relation, but a man her father had trusted with his life. To J. Sterling, urgent, from CEO Naomi Sterling. Subject, Flight HA-882, Operation Clean Sweep. James, I am on HA-882. I have confirmed high-level embezzlement and fuel theft involving Captain Brad Holloway and VP Marcus Thorne. I have audio evidence of Holloway coercing his first officer. Holloway is currently piloting the aircraft. I need a welcoming committee at Heathrow. I want Port Authority Police, the UK Fraud Office, and 2 internal auditors waiting at the gate. Do not alert the cockpit. I repeat, do not alert the cockpit. Holloway is unstable and arrogant. If he knows he's burned, he might do something rash with the aircraft. Also, suspend Marcus Thorne's credentials immediately. Lock him out of the servers before he can delete the Cairo logs. I'm bringing the backup copies with me. One more thing. Have a car ready for me. I'm tired. She hit send. A moment later, a terrifying thought occurred to her. She looked at the lavatory door. Holloway was still in there. What if he wasn't using the bathroom? What if he was checking the passenger manifest again? If he really dug into the system? If he bypassed the standard gate agent view and looked at the corporate ownership codes attached to seat 1A, he would see who she was. The internet degree girl. The hoodie girl. The charity case. If he looked deep enough, he would see the name. Naomi Sterling. Chairman of the board. The lavatory door clicked open. Holloway stepped out. He wasn't smiling. His face had gone pale, the color of old ash. He was holding his personal iPad, his knuckles white as he gripped the device. He looked up, and his eyes met hers from across the cabin. There was no arrogance left in his face, only pure, unadulterated panic. He knew. He had checked the manifest. Or maybe Thorne had messaged him, warning him that the CEO was on board. Holloway stood frozen in the aisle, staring at the woman in the hoodie. The woman he had insulted. The woman he had threatened. The woman who effectively owned the very air he was breathing. Naomi didn't look away. She slowly took a sip of her water, holding his gaze with a calm, deadly intensity. She didn't need to say a word. The look said it all. "Game over, Captain." Holloway took a shaky step toward her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked like he was about to vomit. Miss Sterling?" he stammered, his voice cracking. The deep baritone was gone, replaced by a high-pitched squeak of terror. The entire first-class cabin seemed to hold its breath. The silence was deafening. The air in the cabin seemed to thin, becoming sharp and brittle. Captain Brad Holloway stood over seat 1A, his imposing stature reduced to a trembling mess of nerves. The iPad in his hand shook so violently that the screen auto-rotated, flipping the image of the passenger manifest back and forth. Dr. Naomi Sterling, CEO, Pegasus Holdings. The words were burned into his retinas. He looked at the woman he had blocked at the gate, the woman he had accused of being a stowaway, the woman whose hoodie he had mocked. Naomi didn't rise to meet him. She remained seated, anchoring herself in her position of power. She simply lowered her tablet to her lap and looked up at him over the rim of her sunglasses. Her expression was unreadable. Not angry, not smug, just terrifically cold. "Is there a problem, Captain?" Naomi asked. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper, but in the silence of the first-class cabin, it sounded like a gavel striking a sounding block. Holloway swallowed hard. His throat clicked audibly. He wiped a bead of sweat from his upper lip, glancing nervously at the couple in row 2, who were now watching the interaction with keen interest. I just, Holloway stammered. He dropped to a crouch, bringing himself down to her eye level, trying to make the conversation private. It was a desperate attempt at intimacy from a man who had offered nothing but hostility hours before. "Dr. Sterling, I had no idea. The manifest. It didn't flag your status until I refreshed the system just now. There was a glitch." "A glitch," Naomi repeated, her voice flat. "Like the glitch with the boarding pass scanner? Or the glitch with the overhead bin?" Holloway winced. I want to apologize, sincerely. It's been a long month. We've been under a lot of pressure with the merger, and I I wasn't myself. If I had known who you were— "Stop," Naomi said. She didn't raise her voice, but the command was absolute. She leaned forward slightly, invading his space this time. "That's the problem, isn't it, Brad? If you had known who I was, you would have treated me like royalty. You would have poured my champagne and carried my bag. But because you thought I was nobody, you treated me like trash." Halloway opened his mouth to protest, but Naomi cut him off. "My father taught me that character isn't how you treat your boss," she said, her eyes searching his face. "It's how you treat the people who can do absolutely nothing for you. You failed that test, Captain. Spectacularly." Halloway looked desperate. He realized that an apology for rudeness wasn't going to cut it. He needed to save his career. He forced a smile, a grotesque grimace that didn't reach his panicked eyes. "Look, Dr. Sterling," he whispered urgently. "I'm a senior pilot. I have 30 years of unblemished service. I know the Chief of Operations, Marcus Thorne, very well. I'm sure we can put this misunderstanding behind us. I can upgrade your status to Global Elite Plus immediately. I can comp this flight. Hell, I can ensure you never have a delay again." He was trying to bribe the owner of the airline with free miles. It was pathetic. Naomi looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. He still didn't get it. He thought this was about a bruised ego. He had no idea she had been watching the fuel logs. "You mentioned Marcus Thorne," Naomi said quietly. "You two are close?" Halloway nodded eagerly, thinking he had found a lifeline. "Best friends. We go way back. He trusts me with his life. If you talk to him, he'll vouch for me." "I'm sure he would," Naomi said. She tapped the screen of her tablet, bringing up the telemetry data she had been analyzing. The graphs showing the fuel discrepancies in Cairo and Lagos. She turned the screen so Halloway could see it. Halloway's eyes widened. The blood drained from his face so completely he looked like a corpse. He stared at the jagged red lines on the chart. Flight HA404. Fuel variance. Critical. "I'm not interested in your rudeness, Captain," Naomi whispered, her voice dropping to a lethal calm. "I can handle a rude pilot. What I can't handle is a thief." Halloway reeled back as if he'd been punched. He nearly lost his balance in the aisle. I don't know what that is," he gasped. That's a sensor error." "Save it," Naomi said, turning off the screen. "I have the cockpit audio. I heard you talking to First Officer Chen. I know about the offloading. I know about the cash envelopes. And I know Marcus Thorne is the one wiping the servers." Halloway stood up slowly. He looked around the cabin, paranoid now. He felt exposed, naked. The walls of the plane felt like they were closing in on him. He was trapped in a metal tube at 38,000 feet with the one person who could destroy him. "You," Halloway breathed, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and sudden, irrational anger. "You can't prove that. That audio is inadmissible. It's a breach of privacy." "It's a corporate asset on a corporate jet," Naomi replied calmly. "And I am the corporation. Now get back to the cockpit, Captain. You have a plane to land." "Dr. Sterling, please," Halloway begged, his arrogance shattering completely. Tears actually welled in his eyes. "I have a pension. I have a mortgage. If you report this—" "You should have thought about your mortgage before you started smuggling fuel," Naomi said, putting her headphones back on. She closed her eyes, dismissing him. "Get out of my sight." Halloway stood there for a long, agonizing moment. He looked at her, then at the cockpit door. For a second, a dark thought crossed his mind. He was the pilot. He controlled the plane. He could do something. But then he saw Beatrice, the flight attendant, standing at the front of the galley. She was watching him, phone in hand, ready to call the other attendants. He was outnumbered. He was defeated. Shoulders slumped, looking aged by 10 years in the span of 10 minutes, Captain Brad Halloway turned and walked back toward the cockpit. The walk of shame he had wished upon Naomi was now his own. The cockpit was a sanctuary of humming electronics and glowing screens, but to Brad Halloway it now felt like a prison cell. He collapsed into the left-hand seat, his hands shaking so badly he had to grip the armrests to steady them. First Officer David Chen looked over, concerned. "You okay, Brad?" Chen asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Was it the food?" Halloway didn't answer. He stared out the windshield at the endless expanse of blue sky. It looked mocking now. Freedom was right there, outside the glass, but he was trapped in a cage of his own making. "David!" Halloway croaked, his voice dry. "How much fuel do we have?" Chen frowned, checking the display. "Standard reserves, plus the extra." "Why?" "We need to dump it," Halloway said, panic rising in his chest. He reached for the overhead panel. "We need to dump the excess fuel before we enter UK airspace. If we land heavy, they'll check the weight. If they check the weight against the manifest—" "Whoa, Brad!" Chen reached out, grabbing Halloway's wrist. "Are you crazy? We can't dump fuel over the Atlantic without a declared emergency. Air traffic control will see the spray. They'll ask questions. That's an immediate inquiry. We have to get rid of the evidence," Halloway hissed, his eyes wild. "She knows, David. She knows everything." "Who knows?" Chen asked, bewildered. "The girl," Halloway whispered. "Seat 1A, it's Naomi Sterling, the new owner. She has the audio, David. She has the logs." Chen's face went white. He pulled his hand back as if Halloway were radioactive. "Oh my God. You said Thorne had it covered. You said nobody checked." "Thorne." Halloway scrambled for his phone, which he had hidden in his flight bag. "I need to call Marcus. He can fix this. He can scrub the files remotely before we land." Halloway turned on his phone, a major violation of protocol, but he didn't care anymore. He frantically dialed Marcus Thorne's private number. Ring, ring, ring. "Come on, pick up, you son of a—" Click. "We're sorry," a robotic operator voice intoned. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." Halloway stared at the phone. Disconnected? Marcus had that number for 10 years. He tried accessing the company's internal pilot portal app. He needed to delete his own digital signature from the manifest. He typed in his credentials. "Access denied. User account locked by administrator, N. Sterling." The phone slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the cockpit floor. "It's over," Halloway whispered. "What do you mean it's over?" Chen asked, his voice rising in panic. "Brad, I have a baby on the way. You told me this was safe. What are we going to do?" "I don't know what you are going to do," Halloway muttered, staring blankly ahead. "But I think I'm going to prison." The radio crackled to life. "Horizon 882, this is London Heathrow Control. You are cleared for approach. Runway 27R. Descend to flight level 060. Maintain speed 220 knots. Halloway stared at the radio. He had to fly the plane. He had to land this machine safely, knowing that the moment the wheels touched the ground, his life as a free man ended. "Horizon 882, copy," Chen answered, his voice shaking, taking over the comms because Halloway was catatonic. The descent was a blur of grey clouds and rain. The typical London weather felt appropriate. Dreary, heavy, weeping. As the plane broke through the cloud ceiling, the sprawl of London appeared below. Usually, this was Halloway's favourite moment. The power of bringing a massive bird to the ground. The control. Today, every vibration of the yoke felt like a judgment. "Gear down," Halloway ordered, his voice robotic. "Gear down," Chen confirmed. The landing gear deployed with a heavy thunk. The drag increased. The plane slowed. They crossed the threshold of the runway. Halloway flared the nose, and the wheels kissed the tarmac. It was a perfect landing, smooth as silk, a testament to the skill he actually possessed, skill he had squandered on arrogance and greed. "Reverse thrusters," Halloway murmured. The engines roared, slowing the beast down. As they taxied off the active runway, the ground controller came over the radio. "Horizon 882, hold position on taxiway Alpha. Do not proceed to the gate. I repeat, do not proceed to the gate." Halloway's heart stopped. "Why? What's the hold?" "Horizon 882, follow the Follow Me vehicle to remote stand 4. You have authorities waiting for arrival." Chen looked out the side window. "Brad, look." Halloway leaned forward. Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw them. Waiting at the remote stand wasn't the usual ground crew. There were 5 police cruisers, their blue lights flashing silently in the gloom. There were 2 black SUVs with government plates, and standing in the rain, protected by umbrellas, was a group of grim-faced men and women in suits. It wasn't just a firing squad. It was a federal indictment. Halloway slumped back in his seat, the gold stripes on his shoulder boards gleaming in the cockpit lights, stripes that he had dishonored. "She didn't wait," Halloway whispered. "She called them from the air." In the cabin, Naomi Sterling looked out her window at the flashing blue lights. She felt no joy, no triumph, just a deep, weary sadness that her father's company had been tainted by men like this. She unbuckled her seatbelt as the engine spooled down. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her father's old worn passport holder. "We're home, Dad," she whispered, "and I'm cleaning house." The silence inside the cabin of Flight HA-882 was absolute, heavier than the rain pounding against the fuselage. The engines had spooled down to a faint whine and then died completely, plunging the aircraft into a sudden eerie quiet, broken only by the hum of the auxiliary power unit. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated. Usually, this was the moment of chaotic rustling, passengers standing up, opening bins, fighting to get off the plane. But nobody moved. The flashing blue lights reflecting off the wet tarmac and dancing across the cabin ceiling had frozen everyone in place. Through the window of seat 1A, Dr. Naomi Sterling watched the mobile stairs attached to the forward door with a dull metallic clank. She saw the ground crew step back, their faces grim. They weren't unloading baggage. They were making way for the law. The forward cabin door hissed open. A blast of cold, damp London air swirled into the first-class cabin, smelling of jet fuel and rain. Beatrice, the flight attendant, stood by the door, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. She looked terrified. 2 uniformed officers from the London Metropolitan Police stepped onto the plane, followed closely by a man in a sharp trench coat holding a briefcase, the representative from the Serious Fraud Office. They didn't look at the passengers. They walked straight past Naomi, marching directly to the cockpit door. The door was already open. "Captain Brad Halloway?" The lead officer's voice boomed, projecting clearly into the silent cabin. Naomi couldn't see Halloway, but she heard his voice, small, defeated, and stripped of all its former baritone glory. "Yes. I am Detective Inspector Graves. You are under arrest for suspicion of corporate embezzlement, fuel theft, and endangering the safety of an aircraft. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention, when questioned, something which you later rely on in court." The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and unmistakable. Click, click. A collective gasp went through the first-class cabin. The businessman in 1F dropped his newspaper. The couple in row 2 looked at each other, eyes wide. Their charming, charismatic captain was being cuffed like a common criminal. A moment later, Halloway emerged from the cockpit. He looked like a man whose soul had been evacuated. His hat was gone, his hair was disheveled, and his jacket was draped awkwardly over his shoulders to hide the handcuffs behind his back. He was flanked by the officers, guided down the narrow aisle. As he reached row 1, the procession stopped. Halloway looked down. Naomi Sterling was still sitting there, calm and composed, her hands resting lightly on her lap. She hadn't taken off her sunglasses. Halloway hesitated. The officers gave him a second. He looked at the woman in the hoodie, the woman he had dismissed as trash just 7 hours ago. Halloway choked out. His eyes were red, rimmed with the realization of total ruin. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Naomi slowly removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were dark, piercing, and devoid of sympathy. That is exactly the point, Mr. Halloway, she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that chilled the air. You didn't know. You judged me by my clothes. You judged my father's company by your greed. And now, the world will know you by your mug shot. Please, Halloway whispered, tears spilling over. My pension, my family. You grounded yourself, Naomi said, turning her gaze back to the window. Get him off my plane. The officers nudged him forward. Halloway hung his head, sobbing quietly as he was led out into the rain, down the stairs, and into the back of a waiting police cruiser. First Officer David Chen was led out next. He wasn't handcuffed, but he looked pale and shaken, escorted by the fraud office agent for questioning. He had been complicit, but his cooperation might save him from prison, if not from firing. Once the cockpit was empty, a heavy silence returned to the cabin. Beatrice, the flight attendant, was trembling. She looked at Naomi, unsure of what to do. The hierarchy had been inverted so violently that she felt dizzy. Dr. Sterling, Beatrice asked, her voice wavering. Are we in trouble? The crew. Naomi stood up. She picked up her battered leather backpack and slung it over one shoulder. She looked at Beatrice, the only person on the flight who had treated her with kindness when she was just a nobody. Naomi smiled, a genuine, warm expression that transformed her face. You're not in trouble, Beatrice, Naomi said gently. In fact, I'm noting your personnel file for a commendation. You stood up for a passenger when the captain tried to bully her. That's the kind of integrity Pegasus Holdings needs. Beatrice's jaw dropped. Tears of relief flooded her eyes. Thank you. Thank you, Mom. Naomi turned to address the rest of the first-class cabin. The other passengers were staring at her in awe, realizing that the hoodie girl had just orchestrated the arrest of the pilot mid-flight. Ladies and gentlemen, Naomi said, her voice clear. I apologize for the delay and the drama. I am Dr. Naomi Sterling, the new CEO of this airline. I want to assure you that your safety was never compromised, but our standards of integrity were. That has been corrected today. As compensation for this ordeal, everyone on board this flight will be fully refunded and credited with round-trip tickets to any destination we fly. A stunned silence was followed by a tentative ripple of applause, which quickly grew louder. Naomi nodded once, then turned and walked to the door. She stepped out onto the mobile stairs. The rain had stopped, leaving the tarmac glistening under the airport lights. Below, a sleek black Range Rover was waiting on the tarmac, its door held open by a man in a sharp suit, Colonel James Sterling, her head of security. Naomi walked down the stairs. She didn't look at the police cruisers speeding away with Halloway inside. She looked ahead. James handed her an umbrella as her feet touched the ground. Clean sweep? James asked, his voice low. Clean sweep, Naomi confirmed. Did they get Thorne? FBI picked him up in Chicago an hour ago. James nodded, opening the car door for her. He was trying to shred documents. They got him with his hand in the bin. The fuel theft ring is dead, Naomi. Naomi climbed into the warm, leather interior of the car. She felt the exhaustion finally hitting her. The grief for her father was still there, a heavy stone in her heart. But alongside it was a new feeling, a sense of purpose. Her father had built this airline on hard work and respect. Holloway had tried to turn it into a cheap hustle. She had stopped him. As the car pulled away, driving past the massive Boeing 787, Naomi looked back at the plane one last time. It was a beautiful machine. It just needed better hands to guide it. She pulled her phone out and texted Beatrice one last instruction. Text: Beatrice, when you get to the hotel, order yourself a bottle of the vintage Dom Perignon. Put it on the captain's tab. He won't be needing his expense account anymore. Naomi leaned back and closed her eyes as the car merged onto the highway toward London. The pilot had told her she didn't belong in seat 1A. He was right. She belonged in the boardroom, and she was just getting started. When Captain Holloway looked at Dr. Naomi Sterling, he saw a messy hoodie and a quiet demeanor, and he assumed he was looking at weakness. He assumed he could bully her, belittle her, and cast her aside to feed his own ego. It was the last mistake he would ever make in a cockpit. He didn't realize that true power doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need a crisp uniform or a loud voice. True power is often silent, observant, and patient. Naomi proved that dignity isn't about what you wear. It's about who you are. Holloway lost his career, his freedom, and his reputation not because he was a thief, but because his arrogance blinded him to the one person who could see him for what he truly was. In the end, the hoodie girl didn't just take his seat. She took his entire world. What a satisfying ending to a tense flight. It just goes to show, you never truly know who you are sitting next to. Treat everyone with respect, not because of who they might be, but because it's the right thing to do. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice served at 30,000 feet, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to hear more stories about arrogant people getting exactly what they deserve, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Question for you guys. Have you ever been judged by your appearance, only to prove everyone wrong later? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.